Hello, my name is Evgeny. I want to leave a review about the methodology. Alexander Digilevich. We worked together a month and a half ago. In my case, 5 sessions with Alexander were incredibly enough for me to deeply understand myself and the profoundly mistakes I had been making. If anyone is interested, what it was, watch. Those videos are from the first days when I was just starting to talk with Alexander. What I want to say is that after a month and a half, I've made quite a bit of progress, and I already feel myself a free person. I understand that it will take about another 6 months for the treatment to stabilize, because after all, I am already 30 years old. Speaking about that whole part of my life, I lived in constant shackles. I couldn't express my thoughts clearly and effectively. I spoke as it came to me. This provoked awkward situations. I looked foolish, although I can't say. I always had something, and I didn't consider myself a fool. I read, remember, do other things. To fully realize this, it was very difficult for me, so I was looking for Slavka, who I can say often caused some awkward situations. So I also want to say to myself, I am currently ashamed of my past self, a good sign of progress. When I'm ashamed of my past self, that's probably a very good indicator of progress. When you don't stop at something and realize that there are some dark spots with people in general. You don't stop at something and realize that there are some dark spots, especially not with people, while communicating, not with people at all. Communicate. You reveal your potential, and even if you make mistakes, you understand you have the tools to accomplish your task. So, if you mess up, you mess up. You realize that you have the tools to accomplish your task. So I messed up somewhere, messed up, compared to what it was before. It's like night and day, really. And then, in the midst of each of these mistakes, by analyzing them, you start to understand more and more what is speech. And because of the tools that Alexandra provides, and they aren't very important, and they work when a person has a complete picture of the connection. At first, you work on one element, then 2. More precisely, you understand that when you go through life and practice, you piece all of this together. You get a complete picture, thanks to which you need to interact with people comfortably, like to express your low points, mainly to get pleasure from the most pleasant things. It's when you talk to people and they no longer squint. They're not twisted up. They don't try to understand what you're talking about. Even if they tell you something or anything like that, it's fine. I couldn't quite find the right word at the right time, which happens often. So before, it was a disaster for me when someone finished my thought. Now, it's not a problem at all. What else can I say? There are opinions that, for example, with the same Snezkov, who promotes his method, which is supposedly trained. That's not true. You need to understand that. If you have had a very long experience with stuttering, then certain neural connections have formed in your brain. Your associative array in your head, which is built on your experience, and to change all of that in 3 days. Well, it's just impossible, even if you give it, Alexandra can give you a tool, like a tongue twister, in an hour, just. So what's the point of that? You need to be aware and understand the lesson that he will teach, every material, that he will provide you, and accordingly. Gradually we apply ourselves in this practice in real life, facing discomforts, but knowing where these discomforts come from, you'll be able to gradually rewrite your old experience. This is not a matter of 3 days. I really want to stabilize my speech as much as possible, in all conditions, really, in all of them, and to make this something automatic or fully semi-automatic in 6 months. But on average, to avoid being disappointed in your expectations, I set for myself a plan of circles in order for speech to be representative. And in that sense, I don't want to sell anything. I want my speech to be a direct reflection of my inner world. This is my main goal because there are a lot of ideas I want to catch, and there are thoughts that I want to share. It used to be very difficult. Before, I expressed my intellectual pursuits in writing. Now I can speak. I expressed it in writing, I wrote text. Yes, and now I write as an inspector. And now I have the opportunity to do this verbally. So to talk about this, uplifting music, the way I want to be opt for. The right words, the correct ones, not just any that come out, but the ones that powerful wings. There is sometimes, of course, there are some difficulties, but more and more. With each passing day, they are becoming fewer. I already noticed that those things. I used to struggle with the mystery at the beginning of my training. Now I communicate with them in Paris. Gradually I'm developing my own comfortable way there. The build-ups are disappearing. Yes, he wants to say something very quickly. To say it faster so it doesn't feel so stiff anymore. It's going away. Well, no. Well, I mean, Alexander, he so shifts your attention to what you have. What happens when your attention, it starts to be where it needs to be in the process, and in a natural manner, moves away from where it shouldn't be, and accordingly, you lose your side. Issues, for example, like take a deep breath slowly with every word, to tense up while talking. There was a table. Constantly moving your eyes in different directions while speaking, tensing up without unnecessary. Calm music, the abdominal muscles. In order to supposedly help the air to come out, all of this will go away. And they even worked on this specifically. You don't need to, it all falls away automatically. After experience is acquired, there was a scout. And he, for example, I often make recordings of my conversations with people through the headset. I just turn on the recorder. I spend the whole day with him. Then I come home and do an analysis. Of course, I sometimes have face palms. Well, compared to what it was 2 months ago, this is just perfect. The speech. But there is still a nuance. I work on them and have tools for analysis. There, I listen to my speech and understand what I did and why it couldn't have been any other way. This is very important to grasp. Sometimes it happens in life. A person who, because of the tone, the days when he speaks more or less normally, says the state of Kavalka, and the attitude towards this is somehow, well, thanks to the knowledge you have gained, brothers from Alexander, you'll understand that nothing happens by itself. Everything has its reasons. All has its consequences. And accordingly, when you start to consistently maintain clear speech? Well, not so much to hold, but to maintain no, just to carry out this process normally. Then you will not see it as something that simply occurred on its own in any way. You will just see that otherwise it couldn't have turned out that way. That is, there weren't those reasons that could have disrupted your speech. There weren't reasons distracting you. The question is, distracted you during your speech? And when you encounter some, I don't know, difficulties, blocks, hesitations, something like that, then you'll look at it and understand. It couldn't have been any other way because there's one variable, there are prizes, and they interact, they create conflict, and these are the laws of physics, biology. All this knowledge, speech can be translated almost like it's too complicated, so you don't need to. Alexandra will explain everything to you in simple terms. He has incredible patience, really. Oh. Like if, for example, that you won't be able to understand simple things. He's looking for a different approach here. In order to convey something to you, speech is simple, yet we live in darkness. We live in this darkness. When there is no understanding at a sensitive level, difficult to what is speech, and speech is simple, but you have to get there. And Alexandra serves as that guide. That will change, not just your speech, but your life essentially, because this is already a different life scenario. These are already different events. This is already, you will live no longer in a static world when everything is supposedly predetermined and you just float through life like this, literally, like in a hole in the ice. So you will have freedom of choice and will. It's about saying something to someone in a certain way. React appropriately, and accordingly, your life path will transform. So, I recommend you specifically to Alexandra Degilevich because he doesn't promise golden mountains. He is extremely objective. You should probably throw out of your head all this fantasy about how, well, you can just fix everything and talk to a speech therapist or psychologist and I'll wake up the next morning and everything will be fine. Until I was 30, I would wake up hoping to wake up, everything would be fine, everyone would forget the terrible dream. I realized I had issues I couldn't handle alone. I have problems. And she won't be able to handle it. There are specific laws so that even the law itself, natural patterns, speech patterns that are learned by children from the earliest age. And for them, it's simple and easy. Their new experience, they can make mistakes. Gradually, they get used to understanding how our sometimes stumble, but they are forgiven, they learn. They can't stretch it out in a cool way, and gradually they get used to understanding how our speech apparatus works. Speech apparatus. But sometimes, of course, there are such breakdowns in the psyche when a person takes the right action. For example, when they respond to stress, it gets fixed. And accordingly, every mistake is perceived as the only thing that should be done, with no alternatives, no more. That's it. And here it begins. A happy life, stutterers. Complete happiness in the crusts. What else can I tell you else? about Alexander Digilovich? Well, first of all, he doesn't hold back on information. You just won't realize it. You won't see anything like him holding back any knowledge from you. He's trying to stretch the classes so that you give him more money. No, he gives as much as you can carry if you're able to carry it. For example, only a certain amount of the small, so it doesn't make sense for him to explain more to you. If there's potential, then he'll give you more. For example, I initially planned 10 classes. In fact, there were 5 or 6 of them. And then I really didn't feel the need to continue working with him. Because for me it was vital, it's necessary. I understood that I really needed this. If not, it was all bullshit. Well, even after that, after we worked together, Alexander is always generous and shares useful information, which I rethink and highlight for myself, something new. Because it seems like speech is something so simple. Actually, it's very complicated, like walking, meaning we move with both legs. It seems simple to us if we think about it. How many muscles? At the same time, simultaneously, our vestibular system is involved. So, do the eyes work in this process? They move along such a trajectory to understand where to step and where not to assess the landscape of the area. Our brain works like this. A microprocessor, powerful, not even a micro, but just a processor, powerful enough to calculate all the movements of the legs. So walking is complex. The same goes for speech. It's a very complex mechanism of interaction between the user and their body. The same goes for speech. It seems like the tongue, teeth, lips, head, eyes. But how all of this should work together to combine with our thoughts, with our attitude towards the surrounding things. There will be no psychotherapy with Alexander Digilovich, even if it will be a punishment. I mean something about psychology. It won't be psychology. It will be objective. It will be an objective interpretation of reality, meaning this is normal for people. An objective interpretation of reality. That's it, I mean, for people this is normal. In reality, what's happening in the heads of those who don't have speech issues? Why can't they speak normally? And what's wrong in their heads? For those who have this problem, because if there wasn't this problem, then there wouldn't be any issues, naturally. It's just a simplification of this tautology. Well, I wish you success. Good luck. In the market. In the market with this. With the optimal doctor. In the service market for treatment for stuttering, there's considerable competition, but at the same time there isn't any, indeed. Because there are some methods, like Alexander recently talked about, or Lydia. There, they treat it. I also watched some videos. It's just a nightmare. People's speech is unnatural. They can't choose the pace, they can't change their speech however they want. And speaking like robots is not okay. Speech is something that, yes, should express. What should better reflect a person's thinking is how human intelligence perceives rules in terms of speech, how he speaks, what words and phrases he uses, what he's thinking, how he thinks, how it turns out, what his facial expressions and movements are like, and so on. So all of this reveals in us ourselves. If we want to be ourselves, if we want to be ourselves, then we need to look for tools to realize our mental potential and to do it in a way that people can see and have the ability to influence others in a positive way. For example, I used to really want to compliment people because I love to appreciate the good in them, something about learning, highlighting, what people usually don't notice about themselves. Now I compliment people more often, and it's so nice. It's not just about flattering people, but specifically highlighting what they truly have, what stands out in them, because a person might not even notice it in themselves. Some kind of plus. And when there is speech, you can express it. It's magical. The main thing is that before, about 90% of all the background I have in my head, it was tied to what was defective, destroyed. I also think about speech, of course, but not in the same way that damage. I'm not just reflecting on the things I've learned from Alexander. They are additionally processed so that they don't become... But for me, it's still part of me because there is also knowledge. There is an awareness of knowledge. But it becomes awareness only when you are really good at it. You understand that you can already feel the subject you're thinking about. Because you can know a lot, but not feel it. Speech is something you need to feel, so in that, I think about the world, and I don't think that's a bad thing. We'll dry it. We understand there. I realize that in my free time, there are no longer such depressive states, heavy ones. When I sometimes wanted to be by myself, just within four walls, to avoid irritants and people, because every single interaction with a person or an irritant just absolutely brought my mood truly down to a hellish low. Then I took a long time to recover mentally. Mental stability begins to come. I've become more balanced because my brain, my body no longer produces such an amount of adrenaline that sometimes I was simply shaking. These are the pressures and stresses I had to endure, and challenges while interacting with people. In general, overall, this is my brief review that I'm leaving. After just a little over a month and a half of training with Alexander Degilevich, where I attended just 5 sessions. The main effect came to me during the first session, after which an explosion of incense, a bomb. It was like this because before that I had been thinking a lot. I talked a lot about trying to fix things on my own, but I was missing a couple of key pieces. No, when I voiced them with Alexander's words, there was an explosion in my head, everything came together. A more or less clear picture, and... Come on, it's all so simple. But you still have to get to that simplicity. It's not worth considering yourself smarter, for example in this matter, because there may be people who argue with Alexandra, but I think it's not worth doing yet. That's why, if a person hasn't been able to fix their problem on their own, then they simply don't have the right to argue with a competent person. That's why before I met Alexander, I tried a lot of various methods, including raw food diets and sports, and Thai boxing. I thought it was in the nature of the problems. It's not in the nature of the problems in a raw food diet. I turned to the Victorians in order to influence the psyche through the body, to correct my diet, in order to rev up the brain, to think better, to reason better, to speak more clearly, and so on. So there were these theories in my head, ridiculous ones, over and over again. I realized that, damn, what I'm doing is complete nonsense. That doesn't happen. So that won't solve the problem, it's something else. Discovered in this state when I realized that everything. I found the page of Alexander Degilevich. Fortunately, I didn't end up with Snezhkov. I was one step away from Snezhkov, but just in time. This guy really showed his true colors. In one of his recent broadcasts, that he was giving to the public to promote himself, to promote his method. I was watching those broadcasts, yeah. Then I started to doubt. He began to say things that made my ears perk up, like a tree. My ears perked up. The hair on my head just lightly rustles. And that really made me think, is this person even normal? Matches his words, his actions and deeds. I started to doubt. In these doubts, I came across half a page of Alexander Degilevich, where he explained his method in detail. He also talked about Snezhkov. Then I thought, wow, how good it is that I didn't end up with him. To this guy, this character, folk tales. I really liked Alexander's approach. A balanced person, as balanced as possible. So, you can recognize a competent person by their stability. If a person loses it, for example, they start twitching, they get angry, yelling like, well, Snezhkov has this thing. He's a twitchy psycho. It's unlikely that he can have a constructive conversation with someone if he's only pushing his own agenda. If a person doesn't understand something, then that's the person's problem, which means the approach is completely wrong. When Alexander communicates with your clients, I can judge by myself if there's something I don't understand. He just looks for support. From others, he immediately adjusts. Well, there is, and there is. I don't understand. It's normal for him to react since he had such a tough experience. It's very hard to take in information. For example, this is completely new for you, of course, and maybe the one that you... It can't be that simple. Maybe. If this is being said about Alexander, then he might be a jerk. So, I wish you success in overcoming ailment mind and ailment of the mind, given the context of these circumstances and the various factors that led us to this, in that unfortunate year. Like, stuttering can be called many things, or referred to as many things, in various contexts. But overall, life goes on, life continues. My birthday is coming up soon, and 3 months ago I would have never thought that life could change like this. So I wish you these changes as well. And basically, besides, good. Alexander's words I'm sharing, I stand and can't do anything. Thank you, Sasha, for your work